All right, so I have decided, because maybe we don't know as much about some of the things that I mentioned, I'm going to read a little bit of the Zapatista writings. So the Zapatista Rebellion began in 1994 in Mexico, in Chiapas, which is the southernmost state in Mexico. It is also one of the poorest. And when NAFTA was being implemented, the indigenous people of Mexico were not thrilled with this. God, I'm trying to get this glare not on my eyes. Sorry. Just lean a smidge forward. Okay. So the indigenous people were not excited for NAFTA because it would mean that they were having to sell their goods at a significantly less price and therefore not make enough money for their communities. Okay, I found in the introduction something that's going to describe this way better than me. The Chiapas Rebellion of January 1st, 1994, was the first denunciation of a new world order from the viewpoint of that order's victims, the indigenous people of Chiapas, the Zapatistas. The beginning of NAFTA, and more generally an era of new global trade agreements dubbed the New World Order by President George Bush and implemented by President Bill Clinton. Chiapas raised from the hidden depths of our continental history an issue that our society seeks to forget. The conquest of the Americas that left millions dead is the foundation on which our civilization is built. To call the bloody events that began 500 years ago a genocide potentially undermines the legitimacy of all that many Americans, Mexicans, and Westerners hold dear. The integrity of our institutions seems to depend more on denying rather than candidly confronting our original sins. Instead of calling it genocide, it is renamed a tragic misunderstanding, a dark chapter of the past, something regrettable but finished, not the responsibility of the present generation. Okay, so a little history on the Zapatistas, continuing on. If you've ever wondered what it's like to see me teach, it's literally this, but I can't pause real life while I read. The Zapatista Revolution originated in the culture of the Mexican and Marxist revolutionary left, the students and intellectuals who were hardened by the massacres in Mexico during the 1960s and 70s. But the significance of the Zapatistas is as much because of their break with the traditional left as their continuity with other revolutionary movements. They harken back to the unfinished 1917 Mexican Revolution of Zapata, where did they get their name, which sought justice for landless Indians and campesinos. Like the 1916 Irish Rebellion and War of Independence, the Mexican Revolution lacked the vanguard party envisioned by Marx, Engels, and Lenin. It was laden with forces considered reactionary or superstitious by much of the left, such as the Catholicism symbolized by the Virgin of Guadalupe and the indigenous peasant cultures suppressed 500 years ago by the Spanish conquest. Yet the Zapatista revolution cannot be understood without examining its roots in Catholic liberation theology, and, more deeply, the continuing tradition of Indian resistance to the conquest and subsequent usurpation of their lands and cultures. Before there was a Marcos or even an EZLN, really should clarify what EZLN stands for, but I can't remember because it's in Spanish. Okay, so no wonder I can't remember because I Googled EZLN and it's still, I mean, I could probably click in it and figure out how to say it in Spanish, but it still just says the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, parentheses, EZLN. So it means that, but in Spanish. Moving on. Okay, before there was a Marcos or an EZLN, there were catechists in Chiapas who had chosen the preferential option for the poor, the slogan of liberation theology proclaimed in 1968 Medellin, Colombia Conference. That meeting was attended by a conservative young priest named Samuel Ruiz who became, in time, the best-known defender of the Indians since his Chiapas predecessor, Bartolomé de las Casas, 5 centuries before. I was just talking about him in class. The apostles of liberation theology learned to immerse themselves in and give organizational energy to the existing Mayan culture of resistance, which continued to flicker in the mountains of Chiapas and throughout Central and Latin America. Instead of imposing their version of Christianity on the Indians, they realized that Christianity had to respect and adapt to the religious traditions of the indigenous. Jesus Christ was seen less as a Western figure sent to inspire the heathen and more like a cosmic symbol accessible through the Indians' own religious experiences. The interview with Bishop Ruiz contained in this volume an important elaboration of this change in theological approach. Due mainly to Marcos, however, there is a diary, a poetry, an intellectual account, and an invaluable window into a movement that has an awareness of its novelty. It has been remarked before that Marcos could use an editor, opines Tim Golden of the New York Times. A recent collection of Marcos' writings, on a review of his writings, titled Revolution Rocks, in an apparent reference to Marcos' relationship with the rock band Rage Against the Machine. Golden's article is more lecture than review. Acknowledging Marcos' gifts as a propagandist, the reviewer wonders if he has led the Indians astray with his radical sheep posture. Marcos should not be canonized, and some of the essays in this volume raise interesting questions about the strategy and direction of the Zapatista revolt. But the cynicism of the media does not seem to allow it to credit the achievements of the Zapatistas thus far in rescuing the Indian question from oblivion. But as the Zapatista documents indicate, this is not a revolution aimed at the transference of political power to a new party, but a rebellion intended to prevent the triumph of amnesia. It is a sharp thorn jabbing into the cold heart of those who refuse to acknowledge the need for reparations to the indigenous. An issue that is 500 years old will not be settled in time for the evening news. And far from being an isolated phenomenon, the rebellion is part of a widespread pattern of confrontations and questioning of global institutions that only a few years ago projected an aura of inevitability. The wish of the ruling elites, most of all, is that a sense of weariness will settle into the consciousness of well-meaning people, that they will accept being entertained rather than engaged. Reading these pages, however, is likely to leave the reader anything but weary. And so finally, I'm actually going to read Marcos' word. So this is the first declaration from the Lacondon jungle, EZLN's declaration of war. This is the declaration of war read by the EZLN commandantes from the balcony of the Palacio Municipal on the morning of January 1st, 1994, on the first day of NAFTA. The declaration is terse and intense, fitting the purpose of going to war. It locates itself within the long struggle of Mexican history, making no reference to other revolutionary traditions. It claims the authority of the Mexican Constitution, Article 39, of which declares an inalienable right to alter the form of government when it becomes repressive. This focus is on the particular Mexican problem of having a dictatorship of a single party, the PRI, in charge of both the state and the army. The declaration therefore calls on other branches of the nation's government to depose Carlos de Gortari Salinas and restore the legality and the stability of the nation. It declares belligerent status for the EZLN and calls for international monitoring of the Geneva Conventions on Warfare. And finally, it surmises its platform in a series of historic code words of Mexican revolutionaries: work, land, housing, food, healthcare, education, independence, liberty, democracy, justice, and peace. I wouldn't have started counting those if I had looked ahead and realized there were like 500, i.e. 10. The Zapatistas thus break quickly from calls for socialism or vanguard notions of replacing the state with a dictatorship of the proletariat or any other new apparatus. They are careful to tailor their demands to restructure the state consistently with the Constitution. The Declaration is a mixture of armed struggle and reformism. The Declaration also proposes to advance on Mexico City while conquering the Mexican Federal Army, a concept that seems helplessly out of touch with reality. What did the Zapatistas mean? Marcos later described a plan to seize the hydroelectric facilities near the Chiapas capital, which provided 45% of Mexican power, but did not explain how the plan was thwarted or dropped. In any case, the gap between the Declaration's military rhetoric and the reality of EZLN uprisings in only 5 towns reinforced the official Mexican line that the rebellion was merely a local one, marginal to the country's overall security. The scholar John Womack makes the important point that the Declaration includes no mention of Indians. Did the Zapatista emphasis on the indigenous only grow as they realized the limits on their national liberation project? It is unclear. The Declaration itself begins with the words, "We are a product of 500 years of struggle, an unmistakable, though indirect reference to the conquest of the indigenous." Marcos' interviews on January 1st made explicit reference to the Indian character of the uprising and the Army's composition. Later, Marcos claimed that the Declaration's drafting committee, including indigenous members, chose intentionally to focus on the national issue. If that is so, the emphasis on the Indian roots of the struggle, on the Indian as the repressed soul and constituency of Mexico, became explicit and primary only later. Finally. To the people of Mexico, Mexican brothers and sisters. We are a product of 500 years of struggle, first against slavery, then against the War of Independence against Spain, led by insurgents, then to avoid being absorbed by North American imperialism, then to promulgate our Constitution and expel the French Empire from our soil. Later, the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz denied us the just application of the reform laws, and the people rebelled. Leaders like Villa and Zapata emerged, poor men just like us. We have been denied the most elemental preparation so they can use us as cannon fodder and pillage the wealth of our country. They don't care that we have nothing, absolutely nothing, not even a roof over our heads, no land, no work, no healthcare, no food, no education. Nor are we able to freely and democratically elect our political representatives, nor is there independence from foreigners, nor is there peace or justice for ourselves and for our children. But today we say, enough is enough. We are the inheritors of the true builders of our nation. We are the dispossessed. We are millions, and we call upon our brothers and sisters to join this struggle, so that we will not die of hunger due to the insatiable ambition of a 70-year dictatorship led by a clique of traitors that represent the most conservative and sellout groups. They are the same ones that opposed Hidalgo and Morelos, the same ones that betrayed Vicente Guerrero, and the same ones that sold half our country to the foreign invader. The same ones that imported a European prince to rule our country, the same ones that formed the scientific Porfista dictatorship, the same ones that opposed the petroleum expropriation, the same ones that massacred the railroad workers in 1958 and the students in 1968, the same ones that today take everything from us, absolutely everything. To prevent the continuation of the above, and as our last hope, after having tried to utilize all legal means based on our Constitution, we apply Article 39 of our Constitution, which says, national sovereignty essentially and originally resides in the people. All political power emanates from the people, and its purpose is to help the people. The people have, at all times, the inalienable right to alter or modify their form of government. Therefore, according to our Constitution, we declare the following to the Mexican Federal Army, the pillar of the Mexican dictatorship that we suffer from, monopolized by a one-party system and led by Carlos Salinas de Gortari, the maximum and illegitimate federal executive that today holds power. According to this declaration of war, we ask that the powers of the nation advocate to restore the legitimacy and the stability of the nation by overthrowing the dictator. We also ask that the International organizations and the International Red Cross watch over and regulate our battles so that our efforts are carried out while still protecting our civilian population. We declare now and always that we are subject to the Geneva Accord, with the EZLN as the fighting arm of our liberation struggle. We have the Mexican people on our side, and we have the beloved tricolored flag. We use black and red in our uniforms as a symbol of our working people on strike. Our flag carries the letters EZLN for Zapatista National Liberation Army, and we will always carry our flag into combat. Before we begin, we refuse any efforts to disgrace our just cause by accusing us of being drug traffickers, drug guerrillas, thieves, or other names that might be used by our enemies. Our struggle follows the Constitution, which is held high by its call for justice and equality. Therefore, according to this declaration of war, we give our military forces, the EZLN, the following orders. First, advance to the capital of the country, overcoming the Mexican Federal Army, protecting during your advance the civilian population, and permitting the people in liberated area the right to freely and democratically elect their own administrative authorities. Second, respect the lives of prisoners and turn over all wounded to the International Red Cross. Third, initiate summary judgments against all soldiers of the Mexican Federal Army and the political police that have received training or have been paid by foreigners accused of being traitors to our country, and against all those who have repressed the civil population and robbed or stolen from or attempted crimes against the good of the people. Fourth, form new troops with all those Mexicans who show their interest in joining our struggle, including enemy soldiers who turn themselves in without having fought against us, and who promise to take orders from the General Command of the Zapatista National Liberation Army. Fifth, we ask for the unconditional surrender of the enemy's headquarters before we begin any combat to avoid any loss of lives. Sixth, suspend the robbery of our natural resources in the areas controlled by the EZLN. To the people of Mexico, we, the men and women of the EZLN, full and free, are conscious that the war that we have just declared is a last resort, but also a just one. The dictators have been applying an undeclared genocidal war against our people for many years. Therefore, we ask for your participation in and support of this plan that struggles for work, land, housing, food, healthcare, and education. Independence, freedom, democracy, justice, and peace. We declare that we will not stop fighting until the basic demands of our country have been met by forming a government of our country that is free and democratic. Join the insurgent forces of the Zapatista National Liberation Army, General Command of the EZLN, 1993.